Hello, today we're going to talk about the 7 critical things that you need to consider when you are building a garden suite. So stick around. All right, welcome back. This is Andy from Suite Editions, where we help homeowners and investors create better homes and generate lasting wealth. Okay, so this week earlier, I put out a blog post entitled 7 Critical Issues to Consider When Building a Garden Suite. Now, I've done a lot of content with regards to some of the requirements for garden suites from city bylaws and building code items. So we talk about zoning requirements, lot size minimums, unit size maximums, height restrictions, parking requirements, and then of course a lot of the building code requirements within the unit itself. But there are a number of things that are going to be at the forefront if you are going through the permitting process or starting construction. And some people have reached out to me after we put this blog post out saying that they found this information to be very useful because they're right in the middle of the permit processing stage, or they're actually beginning the construction. Okay, now all of these things I've considered for my own projects, as well as assisting our clients during the initial stages, but they're really basically front and center when you are going through that permitting process or going through that construction process. So it's really important to kind of reiterate these things just because of how important they are. And this is what we're going to be doing in this blog post. I do recommend that you check out the blog post, but if you want to have sort of a quick overview here, you can just watch this video and then check out the blog post later. Okay. So let's go over these 7 things. Okay, so the first thing is access to the site. Second thing is foundation system. Third is plumbing and drain service to the suite. Number 4 is the electrical service size. Number 5 is the heating system. Number 6 is the water management around the garden suite, as well as to the neighboring properties. And then number 7 is how to ensure that you're maximizing privacy. Okay, so let's go through each of these 7 items individually. So the first one is access to the site. So when we think about access to the site, we think about kind of the day-to-day function of the garden suite and how it interacts with the main property. So that's incredibly important. You want to ensure that people have their privacy, people are able to get in and out of their unit easily, and that's going to be long-term. That's going to be a long-term issue that will make this property functional or not, right? But we also have to consider access to the site for construction. That's going to be very important as well. And it depends on how big the unit is. And that's going to determine what sort of equipment that you have to get in there. So for example, if you have to excavate because you're putting in a basement, you're going to have a lot of heavy equipment in there, okay? And this is why we recommend, obviously, the larger the site, the better. But we'll go over a couple of these scenarios for you. Okay, so number 1 is if you're able to get a corner lot, that's the most ideal because you have direct access from the side street to the site. If that's not possible, then a wider lot, right? Perhaps a driveway that leads right to the backyard. That's going to be ideal. That's what I looked for in my last project, where there was a double wide driveway leading to the back, so access was not an issue. Now, in a lot of cases, you have no choice, right? It's an interior lot. Maybe you only have 4 or 5 feet on each side of the house. Maybe you're able to get a mini excavator back there. Maybe not, and that may dictate the type of foundation that you're going to use. Okay, which is going to segue us to the next point. Okay, but the first thing is access to the site. Think about that. Think about access to the site for construction, and then think about access to the site for the day-to-day occupant usage. Okay, so the second item is the foundation system. So essentially we have, at a very high level, 3 types of foundation. So we have a pure type foundation, sort of like a post and beam foundation system, where you have, you dig a hole and you pour a concrete footing, or there might be some sort of a screw down footing, and then you have a wood frame that rests on top of that gets insulated. Okay, that's probably the most cost-effective option, but it's probably not as durable as the next 2 options, which is a slab on grade foundation and then the basement foundation. So a slab on grade is essentially what it sounds like. You have a concrete slab 3 or 4 inches that's laid on top of the grade surface with gravel and insulation underneath. Depending on the size of the unit, you may or may not be required to put in a proper foundation wall with footings. Okay. The last one is a basement. Of course, that's going to be the most disruptive. That's going to cost the most, but it's potentially going to provide you a lot more additional square footage. Okay. Depending on how deep the basement is, depending on the site, you may have structural shoring that needs to be done so that the earth doesn't collapse while the excavation is happening, especially if you're on a site that is potentially the soil is quite sandy, which was something that happened in our last site. As we were digging, the sand kept closing in, so that's something to consider. So you can have a standard poured concrete foundation. You can have a concrete block foundation. You can also go something that's a little bit more unique, such as an ICF foundation, which stands for insulated concrete forms. So basically, you form these foam pieces of foundation. You pour concrete in, and then that just stays in place. Okay. And then you would backfill it, and then you have the basement. Again, having a basement is going to cost a lot more, but potentially it's going to, possibly double your square footage. So it's something to consider. Item number 3, which is plumbing and drain service. So we're going to start talking a little bit about utilities right now. So a lot of people are, they're surprised when we tell them a garden suite can cost, upwards of at least $200,000-$300,000, and they're wondering, isn't this just sort of a glorified shed? Why is it costing so much? And of course, you have to do a proper foundation, you have to do a proper structure. Everything on the inside is going to be brand new, but there's going to be a lot of costs associated with utilities, right? So, of course, you need to pay the tradespeople, the licensed tradespeople that are going to be doing the plumbing work, electrical work, heating work. But then there may be additional utility companies that you have to get sorted. There may be additional permits, and this is why this stuff can cost a lot of money and can really add up, right? So these are sort of things that you want to consider. So the first thing is plumbing and drain service. So plumbing, I'm talking about bringing the water to the unit, and then the drain service is, of course, all the sewage that has to leave the unit itself. Okay, so find out from the municipality whether you can go through the existing house, whether you have to do a Y or a T connection in front of the house, or whether you can connect to the city main itself. Okay, most of these won't allow you to connect to the city main. Although there are some that may. Okay, so you need to find out. So we made a mistake on our last project where we had verbal communication from the city early on that we're able to go through the house, but then when the inspector came, they said that violated the plumbing code. There is some room for interpretation in the plumbing code there, so we had to reroute it to the front of the house, which costed us extra money, of course, because we already spent all that time, effort, and money connecting it through the main house. So you want to find out for the plumbing and drain service whether you can go through the existing house, whether you have to do some sort of a Y connection, or again, if you can go to the city main. Now, if you can go to the city main, that's going to cost more because you have to get a site servicing road cut to be done. However, that may make sense because now you're separating all of the utilities, and it just makes it better for servicing down the road, perhaps. Okay. So something to consider, especially if you have a corner lot, that's where it might make sense. Item number 4, electrical service size. Now, when you have a single family home with a basement second suite or a second floor second suite, we always recommend going to 200 amps if possible. You may not absolutely need it. Sometimes you're able to get away with 100 amps if you have a lot of appliances and systems that are fueled with another source, such as gas. However, in most cases, we do recommend 200 amps. Now, if you're having a second suite and you're having a garden suite with a third unit, definitely you're going to go at least 200 amps. In some cases, maybe you might even want to go 400 amps, depending on the service area and what you're allowed to do. Now, depending on the local utility, so for example, if you're in Toronto, it's Toronto Hydro. If you're in Hamilton, it's Electra Utilities. They may or may not allow you to have a 100 amps going to this garden suite. Okay, so you need to find out from the local utility, have your electrician do a load assessment to see what's needed, and ideally you want to have 100 amps to this garden suite. Okay, and if you can't get 100 amps, make sure that, let's say it's 60 amps, make sure that all the items that are going to be in this garden suite is the service that you have, the 60 amp service, is adequate for it. Okay, and the big one, which is going to be the next topic, is heating. Depending on the service size, you may or may not be able to get a heating system that is sourced with electricity. So you may or may not need to get a gas line. Okay, so let's discuss that for a second. Okay, so heating systems, there's many ways to provide heating to a to a typical home. You can have a forced air system with a standard air conditioner. You can have a hot water boiler with radiators, and then you can use mini split or a portable air conditioning unit. You can have electric heat pumps with baseboards as supplementary heating. You can have a heated slab. So all of these things apply to the garden suite as well. It's just that because the garden suite is a lot smaller, then some of these systems might be overkill. So for example, a forced air furnace with a standard air conditioner, you have a home that's 1,000 square feet with a basement, that makes sense, right? But if your garden suite is 600 square feet, single story, that might be overkill. So you might want to consider putting in a electric heat pump with baseboards as supplementary heating. Again, if you have adequate electricity, so you want to look into that. Okay. Keep in mind that if you are building a new garden suite, you're also required to have what's called an HRV, a heat recovery ventilator, to bring fresh air in and take the stale air out of the garden suite. So speak to your HVAC contractor, speak to your electrician. It's going to depend on the size of the unit. It's going to depend on the electrical service size, and then really, if you have the space that's needed for all of these additional equipment. Item number 6. Okay, so we're going to move away from utilities and we're going to talk about water management. Okay, so water management is always important, whether you have a single unit, you have 2 units, or 3 units. When you're adding in a garden suite, you're taking away land area on the lot, which means there's less place for water to be redirected and to settle, right? So it's incredibly important when you're putting in a garden suite to make sure that all of the water runoff that's coming off the roof of the garden suite, that gets directed properly. So make sure your gutters and downspouts are working properly. Make sure the grading is done properly so that the water is not directed back to the garden suite to any adjacent units like the main house or the basement of the main house, nor to any neighboring properties. Okay, so of course, water being directed to neighbors, that's a bylaw violation, and you want to make sure that you're obviously not causing water issues to become an issue on the main property. Okay, so make sure you have, again, properly functioning gutters, downspouts, and then grading around the property. Okay, so the last item I'm going to talk about is maximizing privacy. Okay, privacy is potentially already an issue when you have 2 units. Now you're adding a 3rd unit. Okay, that adds to the complexity of privacy. Again, the larger the lot, the better, so that you can have more flexibility. But sometimes it's just a matter of site planning correctly and ensuring that you think about how this garden suite is going to interact with the main unit, and then potentially the 2nd suite, and then also the neighbors, right? So implementing things like fences or landscaping features to separate exterior spaces is a good idea. Minimizing windows facing adjacent properties, especially towards the neighbors. So for example, if you had a 4 feet setback between the fence of your neighbor or their yard, and then you have your garden suite, you probably don't want to have a large window facing directly to their yard, right? So these are things that you want to think about during the design process. Sometimes people might incorporate skylights so that they get the natural light that's required, but then they don't have a window that's staring directly at the yard space for the main house or for a neighbor's property. And then sometimes you may want to have larger spaces such as patios and lawns that are directly in front of doors and large windows of the garden suite itself. Okay, so this is a very important part of the design process. It's something you want to think about if you're going out looking at property. How are you going to position this thing so that everybody has privacy, everybody has their outdoor amenity space that they can enjoy for here in Canada several months out of the year, and then kind of make it a long-term functioning multi-unit property, right? Okay, so that's pretty much it. It's important to plan ahead, as I've mentioned. I'm going to highlight, I'm going to summarize those 7 items again. So the first thing is access to the site, important for both construction and then long-term function of the unit. What type of foundation system you're using? Is it a pure type foundation? Is it a slab on grade? Is it a basement system? And then, of course, the plumbing and drain service to the suite. what's the electrical service size that you're going to be using, what type of heating system you're going to be using, how are you going to manage the water on the site, right? Especially if it's a smaller site, and then how to maximize privacy between the garden suite, the adjacent main property, as well as neighbors. Okay, so those are 7 important things that I'm working on for a lot of my clients and then for our own projects as well. And these are things that you want to consider during your design and property acquisition process. Okay, so I hope you found that useful. Check out the blog post for a little bit more detail on what we discussed. And thanks very much, and we'll see you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching our video. We have a brand new garden suite guide, how to add one to your property. You can download a copy right now for free if you go to www.suiteadditions.com. We cover a ton of stuff you need to know if you want to start building these to create more housing and wealth at the same time. There's also a list of resources that we've identified that you can use. Download your copy now for free at www.suiteadditions.com.